and enhancing them through external data. I want to start kind of at the beginning of the process and touch on 4 main stages in preparing to run and manage campaigns with multiple data sources. So the first stage is kind of forming a general strategy. When we all run sales campaigns, service campaigns, manage that outreach and inbound contacts either over the phone or through email, but we have to think about a general strategy, understand exactly what is the point of what we're doing. What do we want to accomplish? Is it just that we feel we need more information for the sake of having information, or is there a specific process and goal in mind, whether it's sales of a kind or better understanding customers to enhance customer service, just better relations, or is it a little more specific segment of sales, for example, new and incremental season ticket purchases. Once we have a broad strategy, we want to think more tactically. So the second aspect is figuring out tactically what the goals are and how to achieve them, whether you're looking at certain segments of your fan and customer universe or the broad spectrum with a specific target in mind, if it's a certain time of year. And then, how are you going to handle all the information coming in? Is it going to be in multiple places? Is it going to be segmented by departments? How is that going to look? Once you kind of have your goals in mind, both a broad strategy and a little more tactically minded, we need to think about what we need to achieve those goals. Do we have all the data we need? Do we have all the information that we need? If not, how do we get that information? Is it something that we can derive directly out of sources we already have? Is it something that we can buy from a third party, or is it the kind of thing such as maybe a survey that you can collect on your own or with the help of a third party? Also, in terms of hardware and software, understanding what the requirements are going to be. If we want to host that information locally, do we need servers? Do we need IT staff? And then that kind of leads into more of a staffing idea as well. Do we need technology staff? Do we need data analysts? Do we need someone to manage CRM directly? What are the needs and the requirements? And what is that going to cost? And taking that in mind, really the last question, the last part of this is, should we do this? Should we move forward? Is it worth the return on the investment? If we're investing in hardware or software, in a new data source, in staffing and technology, is the value that you're going to get for this process something that's worth the effort? And the value doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. There's certainly a lot of value you can get that isn't necessarily dollars. Obviously, dollars is the easiest case to make when you go to management and ownership asking for budget, but it's certainly not the only thing. Better understanding the needs, the preferences of our customers and fans, we'll be able to sell them a little bit down the line, and monetary is the kind of ultimate goal there, but certainly not the initial one. And if we look at all of these things and we realize that it does make business sense to proceed, it is something that we can do, then we start looking a little more specifically. So looking at different data sources, everything's going to kind of tie into our customers, to accounts, businesses that we work with. There's a lot of different information out there. Ticketing, certainly something that everybody's got just kind of out of the gate, right? We all run ticketing. We all have purchase and cancellation history, order information, when they ordered, and probably attendance data as well. You may also have secondary market information, so better understanding, again, a different segment of the market who's buying the same product a little differently. You have the one added advantage, of course, of understanding a price point. Are people buying a certain ticket because it's a little less, or conversely, are people willing to pay a little more of a premium over the face value to get a ticket, and what does that tell you? That kind of information is kind of there already, but knowing how to use it is important. Appends is certainly a part of this. Third-party data appends, whether it's through InfoUSA or Dun & Bradstreet or Axiom, getting that extra information either directly or through another third-party reseller. But there's a lot of information there. Right? I mean, Axiom can have, I think, something like 500 data fields. Do you really need all of those? and can you use all of those? Are they, maybe they're not populated, maybe there's not a lot of information, but understanding what you're looking at is a piece of it. Scoring, renewal scoring, likelihood, risk, and renewal scoring for existing and potential leads and existing customers also has a lot of data there, both because of the data that is used to generate those scores as well as the value of the scores themselves. Whether it's internally generated, an internal algorithm, which we know many teams do, or it's through a third party like Turnkey Prospector or Ticketmaster Live Analytics. Understanding all of the pieces that come into that certainly is an important thing, and how you want to hold those as well. Surveys can be a little tricky. There's a lot of information in surveys, and there's a couple of ways to really get the best information out of that. But how are you handling surveys? It's generally pretty unstructured. There's sometimes some free text answers that have no form really, and how do you utilize that? And how do you look at the survey data over time? How do you look month over month, season over season, making sure that you can see kind of trends and how to handle that? And then how do you use it a little more tactically as well? How do you get that information in front of the reps in a way that helps them as opposed to hurts them and can improve results? Email response data, that information can be very helpful in understanding what emails get read, which ones don't, when you have the most success selling, what kind of emails. There's whole schools of thought behind subject titles and time of day sending, and a lot of information there. And understanding the best way to handle all that information, and then understanding the context of the information as well. Did you get less responses or less opens or less clicks because of the time it was sent, or because of the content of the email, or because people just aren't interested? There's a lot of variables to consider. And then also other data such as concessions, loyalty, and anything else. There's certainly a loyalty in particular is a growing area. Concessions, there's information, but it's not always readily available to sales reps when you're working with your concessions partners. But having that information certainly can be helpful. When you look at all of this information, you realize it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of information here. It certainly can't all go into CRM, which might be the first thought that a lot of people have. So ultimately, there kind of needs to be a bridge so that you can target specific customers and accounts with the right message, but in a way that's not slowing and shutting down your CRM system or kind of crashing a database because there's so much information. And also in a way that doesn't spend time for sales managers or analysts or whoever it is sifting through just tons and millions of rows of information looking for something that's helpful, having it a little more based around a kind of a built-in system based around what can be helpful. So in looking at all these different sources, we thought we'd take a look at some best practices that we've seen with our clients, people we've worked with, and things that we've heard throughout the industry. So the first is appends. Understanding which fields are relevant, which fields are not, right? Paring down that data. That's what we were talking about before. There's 500 rows or fields of data. How do you know what's important and what's not? And it's going to be different for different teams in different areas. Geography is a big piece of it. Understanding the context is important. If, for example, if you have an axiom field on the square footage of a house, that's something that can be very important in the Southwest or the Southeast, for example. But in the Northeast, where property is a little bit more expensive, your financial ability to spend money on tickets may not necessarily be shown as part of your square footage of your house. So understanding what the data means and whether you're looking at it and how it can actually help you. And then looking at the big picture before making the associations, understanding there are some kind of free field responses in these in terms of information provided by Axiom, by B&B, by InfoUSA, understanding the context of them all, and understanding how to store them as well. But looking at the big picture, understanding that if 10% of your records have a certain field filled in, maybe that field is not something that's very applicable, that's not going to be helpful for you. and then using that data. So if we have some of this information, we know people's preferences, we know products they buy or where they live or if they have a second home, finding that extra information, how can you get that in front of sales and service reps in a way that's helpful? You don't want to give all the information to sales reps, they'll get too bogged down, but having some key points, knowing some preferences, knowing a couple extra facts about your customers can really make a big difference. And we find that very helpful is just striking that balance. What can be useful, what can be helpful, and what's too much information. And it's going to be different if you're dealing with ticket sales, for example, than it will be if you're dealing with customer service. So understanding the right balance and really also knowing more about your reps who can have that conversation in kind of a natural way. So the next is scoring, kind of risk and renewal scoring. Many teams have done kind of third-party scoring, so having a turnkey or a Ticketmaster come in and do it. But some also do it internally, and honestly, some do both. Some do it internally as a standalone score. They just created their own method. Some use it to augment the other scores that they have. It's kind of what works best for each team and the staff that they have, but the more information you've got, maximizing the number of inputs you have, whether it's purchased through an append, whether it's ticket history, and then whether it's some other features. We certainly have some clients who use non-purchase, non-append related results. So what does that mean? It means whether the people attend, whether the fans are interacting with the team, responding to emails, for example, or participating in non-game events, if they call into the front office for either a compliment or a complaint or whatever the case is, putting all of that towards the renewals. So we have some people that have found that even if their score isn't 100% that they're likely to buy just based off of the numbers, having that other information and seeing that they came to all the events, that they come to a special season ticket holder event, that they interact with the team, even if it's not all positive, the fact that they're interacting shows that they're invested and that they're likely to renew. The ease of repetition is an important piece of this as well. Scores are often based on information that we know up to the point when the algorithms are run. So the score is accurate when you create the score, and then it quickly goes out of date as other information comes in. So creating a system, whether it's internal or you're pulling it from a third party, creating a system that's easily repeatable, that can be regenerated for new or existing clients with minimal time and effort on the part of staff to get those new up-to-date scores and really have accurate information in front of your reps. And then using multiple scores. There are certainly different sources for scores, and we have absolutely seen multiple organizations using all the scores that they can and kind of compiling a composite of everything that they've got, different algorithms, different sources, and fine-tuning one that works for them, and that seems to work best for their fan base as well. So some of that's a little trial and error. Some it's what people feel comfortable with, but that's something to absolutely consider. So moving on to fan and customer surveys. There are a few different techniques of doing this and certainly some key points to think about. Diversification of your surveys. Often we'll see different departments want different things. One department wants to know about specific sales habits. One wants more about customer and the fan experience. Doesn't make sense to split that up into two separate surveys that go to two separate universe of fans and customers to get both the most statistically significant results, but also to not bombard all the fans with either a lot of emails and surveys or one that's so long that you're going to have dropouts and people aren't going to be completing it. So trying to break up as much as possible in a way that still makes sense. Consistency of survey structure is something that is very important and can be difficult for teams to move forward with because it's the kind of thing that if you haven't done it before, you have to start now and you won't reap the results till later. And long-term thinking isn't always the easiest thing in the world to do in this world, but it can be so important. It means asking the same questions year over year, having the same structure of the questions year over year. We've seen some where even just the changing of the phrasing of the question, do you enjoy the experience at the ballpark, can adjust the results in a way that makes no sense based on people's sentiment. It's just because we phrased it differently and they're answering a different question. And then also a scale. If you're asking people on a scale of 1 to 10, keep asking them on a scale of 1 to 10 instead of switching to 1 to 5, because then you kind of have to start over as you look year over year. And that, that season by season and beginning of season, middle of season, end of season analysis is something we've found that upper management and ownership really like to see. It's something that's that high-level view that gets a lot of good, feedback, but making sure that the results are something that you can actually stand on. And then using free text questions when necessary and trying to limit it. Asking those questions of open-ended questions can be helpful. An example of that is John Lucas, who works here at Green Beacon. He's been a season ticket holder for many years. After over a decade, the Bruins moved to hot chocolate stand with it, so hot chocolate was no longer available in the arena. There was a survey question, it was a free text. Enough people wrote in that they wanted the hot chocolate stand back that it came back in the stadium. That kind of direct result is something that fans appreciate, and it's something that can be then related to later in efforts by the organization. The other side of that and the balance is making sure that people are actually reading those free text questions. So staff, someone is going through the survey results and actually analyzing everything that gets put in there, and to that effect, trying to balance the amount of questions you put in there. If you have a survey that's responded to by 1,000 people and you've got 10 questions in there, that's 10,000 responses somebody has to go through. That takes a long time. So balancing that, how much you think you'll get out of it, there certainly is a point of diminishing return for the number of questions like that you can have. And then finally, linking to the customer. This is probably the most important piece, especially when it comes to those standard scale response questions. Understanding who is responding to your survey. Do you have them in your system? Do you have them? Can you tie them to CRM? Can you tie them to the ticketing system? Making sure that you've got who's answering you, and you can tie it into all the other data you have. And that's not always going to happen. Certainly, if someone gets a survey because their email is connected to the website, or they've registered as a user on the website, but they've never purchased tickets from you because their brother always gets them tickets, then that's something that's you can create a profile, but you're not going to match it to anything. But you'll want to still create the profile so next year, when they get the survey next year, you have something to go on as well. Certainly, that fan is an important part of it, and maybe you can start selling them tickets directly. And then, lastly, displaying the appropriate information when needed. So making sure that this kind of goes back to the same thing as with the pens and really with everything else. What is the valid information? Did you have a good time at the ballpark last time? Something that you want to put in the profile? Maybe not. That gets out of date pretty quick. But do they have any? If they have a complaint, if they do have a free text question and they say, "Hey, my seat's loose every time I come to the ballpark," that's something that you want to put in there, put in the profile, and make sure that we're aware of, not just to fix it, but also so that the next time that person calls in, or the next time we call to them asking, do you want to renew your tickets, they'll say, we can tell them proactively, we actually fixed the seat that you told us about. Thank you for letting us know. Balancing how much information is useful for the reps against all the information that may not be useful, of course. Email response. There's a lot in context involved in this. What time was it of the email? What time of the day? What day of the week? What week of the year? When was it sent? Was it sent in the off season? Was it sent in spring training? Was it sent after the team goes on a 10-game winning streak? That kind of, all of that information can really skew results. We're not operating in the vacuum, and looking at those results are certainly important. Understanding exactly what an open is. What does that mean? Is it if we have a high percentage of opens, is that something that we should be happy with, or does it really matter? If you download images into Outlook or you download them to a mobile device, that's an open whether or not the person even really looked at it. So maybe we want to look at something a little different. Maybe you want to look at clicks or how many people have passed through the site. Tying a click to a purchase is difficult, but not impossible. It's certainly there. But when you look at the aggregate, when you look at all the information on the whole, understanding that if you had an X number of click-throughs and then a spike in buys right after the email went out, there's a correlation there that even if you can't tie one-to-one, you certainly can know that it is there in the abstract. Unsubscriptions, not something anybody wants, but it's good to understand what they are. We always see a spike as we get towards the All-Star break. There's always a spike in registrations as people want to vote, and then right after the All-Star break, there's always a drastic break off of subscriptions. A lot of people unsubscribing, either who just subscribed to vote or who unsubscribe as a result of the fact that they received so many emails leading up to the All-Star game, both from the team and from BAM. Certainly they don't differentiate. Fans don't. So understanding what that really means. Okay, we saw a 20% drop in subscriptions and registered users in the 2 weeks after the All-Star game. That may not be the biggest deal. That may not be something that's worth worrying about because you're going to see that spike again next year. So understanding kind of the context of all that again. And then being able to act on it. If you see that when you send out a survey that's a sweepstakes or an email that's a sweepstakes or an email that's a survey, and you have more success at between 10 and 1 on a Tuesday, then make planning to try to send emails in the future between 10 and 1 on a Tuesday. Just a lot of it's trial by, by fire, just understanding exactly you have to go out and do it before you know the results, and certainly the impact of all that will change based on who your universe is and who you're sending it to. But it's good to be able to be flexible and feel like, okay, we've learned something, let's act on it. And then high-density Wi-Fi is something that's worth mentioning. It's certainly in its nascent stage right now, but understanding what that means. If you can track people in your ballpark using using their Wi-Fi connection to a DAS or to whatever the network you have in the park is, looking at the aggregate data to see how many people are logging in. Is it a number that you think is something that's useful? Where they are, where they congregate. Tracking flow can get a little complicated, but you can certainly start off fairly simply. This is something that's just in sports in general. It's just kind of becoming, getting a little more traction, but it's definitely going to be a big part of the future. And then just like surveys, being able to match a device, a MAC address, to an existing or to a non-existing customer in the database. The same thing may happen where we can tie it to an existing customer if we have them log in to the Wi-Fi. But maybe they don't have an existing customer. Maybe they come with a friend or a family member. They're not the ticket buyer. Being able to track that person. So regardless, if you have someone who hasn't purchased tickets, we've never heard of them before, but they show up at 40 games a year and they always go to a concession stand where there's a specialty item, then that is maybe if we start thinking about offers or any kind of special promotion we do in park, that's something we want to consider. Half off the specialty item. If you do this or whatever the case is. And then also not just in park, as I mentioned, but also afterwards. If you're able to, at the end of the game, sending a thank you blast message, tying into at the ballpark or anything else, any other app, being able to track them, but also make sure you've got your message out there on how to come back to the park, on whether you want to just do a quick survey, a 2-question survey about their experience, that kind of thing. Being able to track that information. All of that can be useful. So that's kind of the best practices in these areas that we've looked at. But what we want to also talk about is, the real-world example. What is actually, how do we use this information? What is the real-world example of us moving forward to use this information? And for that, I'm going to pass off to my colleague, Richard Smith. Richard?
So we've seen lots of data that has come from multiple sources, and I think the challenge is how do we make sense of this and actually start to use it in the real world. And a few years back when we first started working with CRM in the sports area, it was a lot of the teams and even Green Beacon took the approach of, well, we can try and stick a lot of this stuff directly within the CRM application itself. And for the most part, we were dealing with really one data source. It was the ticketing system. And it was pretty simple that we would put the contacts and the plans and the tickets and that data directly into CRM. But as the data has proliferated and the size and the quantity of the data, not so much as we're talking about plans for a season, but as we start talking about tickets and plans for 5 to 7 seasons, as we start talking about the surveys and the appends and the email results, all of that data, when we start looking at that, the analysis that we want to do with that will not really fit very well within CRM. We need to be able to store that somewhere else, be able to do analysis of it, but also be able to do some level of targeting of the customer base that ultimately sits within CRM. And so how have we actually started to do that and find that proper balance between what goes into CRM and what doesn't? This diagram talks a little bit about that story. And so we take, starting from the left, moving to the right, we look at our source data, and that could be anything we see in these little databases of emails, surveys, appends and scores, our ticket and plan purchase history. And we start looking at that data, and independent of that, we might have some reporting that we're doing of that data. We might be looking at plans year over year. We might be doing some analysis of our surveys or of our email results, and just looking at raw results, maybe even confession data, raw results of that information right off these full data marks. However, we start at the top where it says manual queries. We can start to look at that data and manually pull specific items from there. For example, if we did an email campaign for people that were interested in upgrading their seats through a select-a-seat process, we might want to target those people and set up some type of a campaign to reach out to them and set up time frames for them to actually come to the ballpark and go through the select-a-seat process. Other things, we might want to look at people that have actually clicked through on certain promotions and target them. We might want to look at people with specific risk scores, tying back to our conversation last week about looking at the renewal risk scores for our renewal opportunities. We might actually want to take the plan data and pull that forward into CRM and build our renewal opportunities, and take the renewal risk scores and put those right on the opportunities as well, so that we can do some forecasting in the intermingling of data between the ticketing system and CRM. So in doing that, we would look at some manual queries, some manual massaging of the data, where the teams would come up with their own logic of saying, we're looking for this, or this confluence of different components, of different criterion. And we would use that. I'll talk a little bit about the campaigns and list piece. We'd use that to go ahead and actually start pushing, whether it's a specific targeting of campaigns in CRM or more advanced data, like what we talked about last week in terms of building full-on opportunities for renewal campaigns and things like that directly in CRM. What we're also getting excited about is this automated sub-process component, where we look at specific functionality or specific recurring activities and try and determine if there's a process that can be put in place that should automatically be happening in CRM to capture certain behaviors and prompt a sales rep or someone in the service organization to have some interaction with the customer. So for example, if someone hasn't attended for some number of consecutive games, maybe 4 is too low, but maybe 6 is the right number, we see that attendance for someone in a 20-game pack has risen over a certain number, then we might want to set up some type of a phone call, because that might suggest that something's going on with that customer, with that account, and that there might be some risk of them renewing next year if they're not attending. We might notice, some people, excuse me, might have their email bounce, or they might unsubscribe for all the very valid reasons that Karen had mentioned. However, if a season ticket holder email account bounces or they unsubscribe, maybe again that's suggesting something, and that might want to have us prompt a more sophisticated action where again we have someone call them or prompts us to go and do something more sophisticated within the CRM system. or if somebody says something in a survey response, for example, if they're not going to renew. In any one of these cases, we'd be setting up specific processes, looking at data that's coming in from external sources, looking at that risk score, or looking at that attendance score, etc. Having that come in, and then automatically generating some activity within CRM, whether this is on a nightly basis or on a weekly basis, that's really up to the team. But automatically prompting certain activities within CRM, certain sales activities or service activities, based on what the data is saying. This process in this format is beginning to make more sense, particularly as the number of data sources continues to grow and the complexity and the size of those data sources grows. And as teams are trying to figure out, do I need to keep 4 years of data for ticketing and plans, or is it really 7? Or what's the value of my email data year over year? Or should I keep 3 years? Should I keep 5 years? So knowing that they might need to keep that data for a while and be able to show that consistency to do the year-over-year survey analysis, for example, having access to that data and being able to do things with it, but also being able to keep CRM clean. So CRM is the tool that the reps are using to make those phone calls, and it's lean and it's able to operate very effectively and efficiently. It's not bottled up with all the data from all these other sources. This whole process works quite well and is much more effective in terms of managing the whole process from end to end. So what does the campaign process itself look like, and what would be a suggested process? So we've actually talked through 2 processes, and one is where we would actually start with a phone call. So when we come in, if we were targeting a list of customers from the prior slide, that prior slide might actually have generated a list of customers, again, the people that have responded to an email that want to do select a seat, for example, and we could add those people to a marketing list. A marketing list is just a list of people that we want to send some type of communication to. We would create our campaign, and then we would distribute, for example, in this case, maybe an email or a list of phone calls that we want people to call around that. By doing this, if we're going to do some type of an activity, we are considering these people or this group of contact suspects because, and maybe the select a seat is a bad example because in this case they have told us they want to do something with us. In many cases, if we're contacting them for something, we don't know if they're interested. They only are interested when they respond back and they say, yes, we're interested in doing whatever it is. So we might be prompting someone to buy a specific set of tickets or come to a particular game because of a campaign we're doing. For example, we're trying to fill in seats for a series at the beginning of September, a weekend series, and we know that we've targeted people that come to weekends in early September, that come to a particular opponent, and that buy that have bought 2 consecutive days in the last 2 years. And so we might have gotten 3 sets of lists from our data, and we pulled that, consolidated that, and that's how we built our marketing list. Now, that the fact that we've identified those people doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to buy. It just means necessarily that they could buy. So we distribute those phone calls and let the reps start calling them to determine if there's any interest. We have activity reporting to determine if those calls were made. So did they get them, and what was the result? Was the person interested? Were they not interested? Is this something that appealed to them or not? So we have some tracking on the phone call to say, yeah, this is, they weren't able to get them. There was a bad phone number. The person was not interested. They left a voicemail and they set up a follow-up call, etc. Or if it was qualified, the person was interested. They said either, yes, I'm interested. I would like to buy some tickets, or I would like to engage with you further, and they could create an opportunity. And then you forecast the opportunity. Or they go even further and say, yes, I'd actually like to even go further into a purchase. And the process that we've set up in the way that we've configured our CRM is to actually go ahead and track the campaign functionality or the campaign codes all the way through, so that from a reporting basis, we could show how many phone calls were created from the campaign, how many opportunities were generated from the campaign. And it's somewhat difficult to get an exact attribution of tickets purchased back to a campaign code. But there's some tricks that you can do to get some loose association of when tickets were purchased, maybe based on price code and time frame and event, depending upon what was targeted by the campaign, to start to associate those back. And that drives into that orange box, which is the comprehensive campaign reporting, to eventually be able to bring back to ownership, bring back to justify the cost of these campaigns, to say, look, we were able to generate this amount of revenue from this campaign, and we were able to show it because we targeted these people, and through phone calls, through the opportunities generated, we were able to close this amount of business and show the actual uptick in it. It's difficult to do this without having some consistency in the pattern all the way from the initial targeting all the way through the follow-through of going through the forecasting and tying the campaign process throughout. So the point of this, and really of the last two slides, has been to try and take what is an overly, and sometimes a scary and overly complicated scenario facing many of the teams that we're talking to, with this massive proliferation of data, and try to bring it down to the real world and talk about how this can actually be tied together, how it can actually be implemented in the real world. While, again, Rome wasn't necessarily built in a day, there are bits and pieces that can be put together so that individual teams can start to get the benefits of some, if not all, of these pieces in limited bits, so that over time, as the need for different various pieces of these data sets come together, the teams can start to take advantage of more and more of them and be able to target their customers, understand their fans more and their buying cycles better through this, and leverage the CRM tools for that. Because CRM is really going to be that interface point between the customer and the sales and service teams, but it is only as good as the information that's feeding it from all these various sources that tells you really what the customer is doing. So I'd like to thank you for participating.
Great, thank you very much.
Go ahead, Karan.
I'm sorry, and I was to thank you all very much for attending. If there's any questions, feel free to, I think you should be able to write them in. If there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We have 2 more webinars in the series in addition to the one today and then the one from last week over the next couple of weeks, so we hope that you'll join us for those as well. And